I am finally ready to shape the stock. Everything up to this point was machine work with the square blank would be most advantageous for cutting and milling. This is where the paper template I did in the last video comes into play. So let's get to it. I know the height of the stock will be 5 inches total. So the first order is to set the table saw up and rip both the MDF I'm using for the pattern and the stock blank to 5 inches tall. Next, we set the saw up with the forearm cut for the pattern and the blank. With the blade all the way up, you can cut most of the blank with minimal cleanup needed with the bandsaw. With the major cuts out of the way, we cut out the pattern and lay it on the MDF pattern and trace it in. At the bandsaw, we cut all the curves into the pattern and do a quick cleanup with the file to get everything straight and smooth. With that done, we come back to the bandsaw and rough cut the blanks so we have less material to remove with the pattern routing setup. With this done, we are ready to pattern route. The router bits I'm using are a pair of Freud flush trim bits. They are reasonably priced and cut well. One has a top bearing, the other has a bottom bearing, so we'll have to do this blank in 2 passes due to its thickness. I use double-sided tape to secure the pattern to the blank. 3 strips will easily hold this. Then drop on the pattern, making sure everything is in alignment before we put pressure on it to really bond the tape to everything. My router lift is definitely the safest way to do these cuts with bits that are this size, and at 3.5 horsepower, it's more than powerful enough. I cannot stress how important it is to be careful when doing this type of work with this size bit, especially with as tall a cut as I'm taking. You will see it grab a few times in the video. Take small cuts and keep your hands safe. Enjoy the rest of the first cut in triple time. Now that the first cut is done, I had to verify that the bottom bearing bit would cover the inlet for the action in the barrel without any drama, and it was good to go. So on to the second cut. The first cut creates the pattern that the second bit follows along to finish the pattern routing. You'll see it catch a couple times just like in the first pass. The key is small bites and being patient. Let's let the video finish out because I'm sure you're tired of listening to me talk at this point. With the pattern routing done, we need to start shaping. The majority of the shaping will be done on the butt end of the stock, so let's start there. I'm going to use a Limb Saver Nitro butt pad, which is 2.5 inches thick, so I can really team the recoil on this gun. The pattern is slightly bigger than the end of the blank, so the butt pad will require some shaping up, but that's par for the course with any butt pad installation. I line up and tack on this pattern and trace it out to get a guide for shaping. I also take a few minutes to draw a center line down the entire stock so that I have that as a guide for cutting. The cut-saw disc is exactly what I needed. They are the most safe way to carve with a grinder. If your carving disc has chainsaw teeth on it, it's only a matter of time before you end up on the business end of those teeth. Trust me, as somebody who has done a lot of tree felling and brush clearing over the years, you don't want to be there. The cut-saw disc makes really quick work of wood removal, so you better be paying attention or it will turn whatever you're working on into sawdust in short order. I shot for staying anywhere from an eighth to 3/16 of an inch above where I wanted the shape to be. Once I had a rough shape buzzed in with a grinder on both sides of the butt, I moved to a Japanese Shinto rasp saw. This thing really is the MVP of the entire process. It cuts fast and clean and allowed me to straighten and tune the shape pretty quickly. You can see in the video I'm checking for flat and marking the blank up with a pencil so I can see low spots as I remove material. After about an hour with the rasp and file, I had the shape pretty close to where I wanted it. I would say at this point, the finish is probably like 40 grit sandpaper. I wanted to thin the stock width out over the DBM and triggers, so a quick setup on the router with a guide and a pattern bit and it was done. You can see I still need to refine the grip area more as well as these shots. I also did cut a slight angle into the forend so it wasn't just a block of wood. Didn't take many pictures, but I started with my block plane and finished it up with a rasp saw. Next, we'll be cutting in the DBM from the bottom and the trigger. Both were simple with pattern routing. Draw up and 3D print a pattern, tape it on, and cut it in with a flush trim bit. Nothing crazy, really simple. I did have to do a bit of handwork as my small router will not completely get to the end of the channel for the trigger. I finished the very end out with a Forstner bit and a chisel. Still need to tune the DBM depth a bit, but we'll get to that later. Now we need to start checking against our action to make sure it will fit right. I built up a little electrical tape on the action to give me a standoff to work from for how much pillar protrusion I'll end up with. It took a little tuning, but eventually I hit 0 degrees in all directions for the action sitting in the stock. Digital angle finders are a godsend. If you don't have one, buy one. It simplifies a ton of things in the shop. Now that we have established the action height, next is setting the pillars. I did the pillars in the first video where I explained the setup of the DBM and pillar heights and how they are one of the first things you have to hit correctly before you start anything on the stock. Everything is based around those numbers. If you haven't watched that one, it's mildly interesting to watch me fumble my way through it. I had to finish out the DBM inlet first, as pillar length and height affect where the DBM sits as well. A little more pattern routing and tuning with a chisel and it dropped right in. Once the DBM is set, we can move on to setting pillars. I taped off the bottom of the action and clamped it in place with my long guide screws. From there, we got some DevCon on the pillars and dropped them in, making sure they were pushed all the way to contact on the bottom of the action. From there, we let it dry overnight. You can see my pillars are not perfectly centered in the holes. This is one of the things where I made a small but recoverable mistake last video that I had to fix. Not a huge deal, but drives home the point of being accurate. Next up is setting the final height on the DBM. I consider the DBM and pillars a structural part of the stock, as it helps take some of the recoil when firing. So bedding them in never hurts and assures they are always in the correct location. I tape off the DBM so I don't get any dev count on it because I will need to be able to remove it. There were some very small voids around the pillars. To fill these, I just use a cheap syringe from the pharmacy and inject epoxy into the gaps until it comes out the other side. I added a bit of DevCon under the DBM front and rear in the photo I clearly didn't take. All I do then is just drop in the DBM, put in the guide screws, and tighten it up and let it dry overnight. When done, I pulled the DBM out and quickly realized that someone didn't put release agent on the tape, and the tape stuck to the DevCon. It comes off easy enough with a small wire wheel in my Dremel. Not hard, just annoying, and I could have avoided it altogether. Magnum crossbolts behind the lug and in the grip or wrists of the stock are mandatory in a wood stock with a DBM as far as I'm concerned. I've seen plenty of stocks split right behind the lug over the years, and a crossbolt makes it pretty much bulletproof. I have also seen enough failures in the grip and wrist, so a crossbolt through the grip is also a must-have. I had pre-drilled with an 1/8 inch bit before I started shaping for where I thought the crossbolt would go and ended up pretty close. I was only off about maybe 1/8 of an inch. Setting up a not square object required me to use the cutoff from the stock to hold the side of the stock at a 90-degree angle to drill correctly. I used a 1/4 inch Forstner bit to drill a hole all the way through the stock. From there, I came back with a 5/8 Forstner bit to drill a plug for both sides. A trick for lining this up: keep a strong light behind the bit and you can accurately figure out where the bit needs to go. 1/4 rod might be a bit overkill for this, but it's what I had on hand. The grip bolt is a bit more tricky to do because of the setup. First thing I did was laid out where I wanted it. Then I pulled out a cheap angle finder to get me close. It said 68 degrees, so I set my drill press for 22 degrees and compared the angle line on the stock to a bit. By my Mark I eyeball, it was off a bit, and I ended up right around 24 degrees. With this one, I drilled the plug to depth first, then followed up with a smaller 1/4 inch hole. The curly maple is hard to drill. These Forstner bits are sharp, and it was smoking hot after this cut. After that, I flipped the stock and drilled in the 5/8 inch hole for the plug, then followed up with a 1/4 inch for the rod. I maxed out the depth of the bit and didn't get a pass through, so I finished it with a drill and another 1/4 inch bit. Alignment was spot on because even a blind squirrel can find a nut once in a while. Let's get the cross bolts and the cover plugs installed, which is a pretty simple operation. I cut the plugs from a chunk of black walnut I've had in the garage for a long time. I did end up shortening them a little bit so they fit tighter in the holes. Mixed up some DevCon and smeared it all over the bolts. Best way I found to get good even distribution is to stick the bolt in halfway, pull it out, push the epoxy that came off the rod back into the hole and reinsert. Then push the other end of the rod into the other end, doing the same thing. You can see from the one photo how well the epoxy works its way into the hole, as I did intrude slightly into the lug inlet. From there, put the nuts on, snugging them up to whatever I can easily turn with a 1/4-inch drive ratchet, so maybe 10 foot-pounds. The epoxy locks everything down, so you don't even need a single ugga-dugga for this. Just good and snug is good enough. Once the bolts are in and tight, I put some epoxy on the plugs and push them in good and tight with a clamp. In the morning, I taped off the plugs and cut them off just shy of flush with a Japanese pull saw. I think we're going to call it here, as my typing fluid for this script is getting low. Short recap: overall, everything went to plan. Had to fix my pillar location, which I suspected. I did elect to not use the LRI adjustable cheek riser, simply because I do not trust my bandsaw to cut 2¼ inches of hardwood without burning, or worse yet, wandering, which would scrap hours of work. The DBM fits well, but barely goes into the stock over the trigger due to how I cut the pattern. Not sure what was going on with my brain when I did that. It looks really good until you look at it close. I'll point it out in detail when I have the stock assembled. The action drops right in and is to height, so we can call that a win. Next video, we will work on bedding and the cleanup afterwards, which really deserves its own video. After that, it's all shaping and sanding, and probably some finish, which will get its own video. As always, if you have any questions or comments, drop them below, and I'll try to get back to you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.